Alright, what's going on, guys? I say we go ahead and get started here. And if you are just popping in and did not see my most recent tweet or Facebook post or wherever you saw that I was streaming, 1 second here. Chat is set up. Alright. Just let me know if you can hear me, and let me know if we're all good. Make sure the music's not too loud or anything like that. And what we're going to be doing today is taking a look at our little Bork boy down here. So I'm kind of calling Akala and Bork here finished. I've been working on this for the Art War 2 competition. If you've been following along with that at all, let me see if I can grab my final render here for you guys. I'll show that off. So this is the final render, and then over here we have our detail sheet. And the detail sheet is just something that you have to do. It's part of the competition. Show your character in a neutral pose and highlight some few different areas. It has to be a 2048 by 2048 pixel image. Those are the restrictions, and you have to show as much as you can. So that's that, and that's the final render. But today we're going to specifically be looking at some 3D printing tips and techniques right around Bork here. I would like to possibly 3D print him. I'm gonna make sure I still got this fuzz, our fiber junk down here. It looks like we do. So I think we'll be all good to start that in just a second here. Marco, what's going on? He says, it's been a while. I changed my name in Facebook and Google, but Marco is Tato, of course. Of course, the great Tato has returned to us. The prodigal Tato. Well, Tato or Marco. I guess we can go Marco now. Switch it up. Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. But yeah, we're going to be looking at doing some 3D printing stuff today, guys. And to kind of kick things off here, I am probably just going to delete everything that we do not need and do not want. I actually believe that I have the incorrect file here. Yeah, this is not the one that I want. So this is a file that I use to split some stuff off for a test render for Keyshot, so there might be some decimated parts in here, and I don't want to use that. So let's load up our actual file here. Let me make sure I can find it here. And I have so many ZBrush files from this character. Just backup upon different level of completion. So let me, I think this is good. Let's see. This might be a little bit different. I made some final last minute changes to Bork down here towards the end. So we'll make sure that this is correct. So that's the new one that we just loaded in. And that's the old one there. Alright, I think we are all good. It looks like there's maybe just some material differences, but other than that, we're all set. I am going to click on our old subtool here and go to delete all and click OK. And that'll get rid of all those subtools. And I'm just going to click the little refresh button up here. So that's all we have left. Akala, we're going to delete her. We're going to delete all those subtools. So let's go ahead and go through doing that real quick. Shouldn't be too hard. And Craig is here as well. What's going on, Craig? Welcome to the Craig cast. 3D printing usually work for 3D prints, so any tips are helpful, absolutely. Let's look here. So essentially what I'm going to do, looks like our Borky boy is towards the bottom of the stack. So I'm just going to go up to the top, select this first one, click delete, and click always OK. And then I can just kind of click on delete a bunch of times and not worry about it kind of asking me to confirm every single time. So just a few clicks here. We got a bunch of subtools in this one, but we're dropping that poly count very quick. We're at 28 million, 20-ish. This cloak has a lot of polys in it, so this will be kind of the big one here. A few. Delete all the rest of that, and a couple more there, and that's all for the character. And I'm just going to delete the weapon here as well. I just don't want any of this stuff in the way. So I can kind of unhide and hide everything pretty easily here. So all that down to the rocks. All right, so this is all we have left in our scene. I'll delete the grass as well. And for the rocks here, I will, we can keep a few of them in here. Let's do an auto groups. I have these rocks decimated right now, so that's why they're looking pretty crazy there with their topology. There's still quite a few polys in these. But let's grab our big rock here. Let's grab a few of the surrounding rocks. Let's say these. And I'll just make sure that I have the correct selection tool on there. And we'll do something like that. And I'll probably end up getting rid of a few more of those later, but for the time being, that should be good for us. All right. And this is all set. I have some poly paint on here. So what I would like to do for our stream today, so we're talking about 3D printing, right? The thing that I want to specifically do is set this up for full color sandstone printing on Shapeways. So if you guys are familiar with that, let me go ahead, or if you guys aren't familiar with that, let me pop up a browser here and we'll go to Shapeways. And Shapeways is just an online print-on-demand service. It's one of the more popular ones, but let's go to materials here. And we'll say full color. There's only one that you can use. It's called Full Color Sandstone. It's one of the cheapest materials on their site. But there you can see a few different examples. You got Doge, right? The Shiba, and some flying pig. Maybe it's a Cincinnati thing, I don't know. But here's a few other examples. This one is, you can either get the full color sandstone or you can get it coated with some kind of, not lacquer, but, gosh, what's the word? I don't know off the top of my head what it's called. Some kind of sealant that makes it look a little bit more wet than the standard here. So let me show you maybe. This is really small, really low resolution. I mean, look at that. That's like 2 centimeters. That's incredibly tiny. But yeah, we'll look at printing for this. So whenever you're kind of figuring out what material you want to use, you have to kind of understand some of the stuff about thicknesses, support walls. If you can hollow it out and do some of the different ideas there with structuring your print in different ways. You got to think about orientation, how you're going to print it, all that stuff, and we'll kind of talk about all of that as it pops up. But yes, this is our kind of target goal, this material here. Again, it's called Full Color Sandstone on shapeways.com. And Craig says nothing much going on with him, and I'm doing great. And let's go ahead and dive in. For everybody else that's just kind of joining us here in the middle, we're going to be setting up some 3D printing stuff with my little Bork boy here. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and delete our fibers. So for his stuffing, I used some fibers. I'll just do a quick low-res BPR just to render those fibers out really quick, and we can see what that looks like. So we'll give that a sec. So fibers are great. Fibers are really cool. You can do some really cool effects with them. In this case, I tried to do a stuffing effect, like some fuzz that was sticking out of different parts of my character, and we're getting some weird stuff with the ray count going on here in our material. That's not an issue. We can up the ray count and get rid of that. So we got some of that stuff going on. You can mess with your shadows and your ray count and get rid of that. But fibers are really cool. You can, like I said, do some cool stuffing effects, some different things like that. But what they're not cool for is rendering. So if we zoom in here, you can see that I have all this little geometry. I'm going to smooth it out a little bit, maybe tug it around. You can see that each one of these is an individual fiber, an individual strand of polygons. And that's just really not good for 3D printing. You can't print spaghetti. And most of the time when you're 3D printing, you want to avoid the spaghetti mess. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can probably just Google 3D print spaghetti and you'll see a ton of images of that. So I'm just going to delete it. And luckily what I have here is an older version of me just kind of playing around with the stuffing as a physical object poking out of different areas. I think it's a little bit dark. I think in maybe one of the more recent images, or sorry, one of the more recent files, I have lightened that up and made some additional tweaks to that. So I'm going to load in that most recent one and see if I can find an adjusted version with some lighter colors on there. So let's see if that is the case. If not, we can mess with it a little bit. And it looks to be about the same. So we'll just kind of mess with it manually. I'm gonna delete all that. Don't need any of that. So we can lighten that up and play with that as well to get that to a better place. Let's go ahead and hide our rocks. So I can begin kind of talking about the initial things that you want to do when you're preparing a file for 3D print. So ideally, when you're trying to get something ready for 3D print, well, while you're kind of beginning the sculpt and working on it and kind of going through the entire process from start to finish up to this point, you want to be keeping those things in mind. You want to be thinking about 3D printing while you're doing all of that. And that's going to save you a ton of headaches down the road. And thankfully, I've kind of already done that. So I've kind of already done a lot of the pre-work that will get us to that point. And some of that pre-work includes making sure that there's no floating parts, that there's no weird collisions or extremely thin pieces that are going to cause a lot of issues. So just as an example of what I'm talking about, let's say you wanted to 3D print this character just like this. And if you're completely unfamiliar with 3D printing, what you might assume is that, you know, you just 3D print it all as one piece. And it depends on what kind of method you're going for, but for the typical method of FDM printing, which I think stands for, somebody can correct me, fusion deposit material? I can't remember off the top of my head. It's really not important. What is important though is FDM printing is it's the type of printing that uses PLA or ABS plastic or a few other common materials and extrudes onto typically a glass bed, and then from there builds up layer by layer of thin plastic up to the finished model. So if you're that's the most common way of printing, I would say, for kind of consumer printers. And if you're thinking about that, well, and you wanted to print this guy just as is, one piece, well, you're going to run into a lot of issues. Specifically, looking at the legs, if you wanted to print this guy just standing up, or even on his side as one piece, well, you're going to have, first we'll look at just standing up. These are extremely thin contact points, and you're really going to run into a lot of issues. What happens for floating parts, so anything that's not touching the bed, so for our legs here, and then the belly, what you get is support material. And support material up underneath the belly, well, in truth, you want to avoid support material as much as humanly possible, because then you have to clean up your print after the fact. And from anybody that has experience working with supports, after you remove those supports from your 3D print, you're going to have a bunch of different artifacts on there. I have a 3D print over here that's made in PLA plastic. So this is a pretty large print. This was made on a Fusion F306 a couple years ago. I was going to prime it and sand it, but thankfully I didn't, so that I can show you guys this illustration. If you look at the back of it here, it's a little bit hard to see. If I run my pen over one area, it sounds pretty smooth. Maybe if I can do that over here by my microphone. But over here you can see that there's a lot of, I don't know how well it appears up in the camera, but there's a lot of areas where there were supports, and by just kind of ripping those off, most of them did come off extremely cleanly, extremely clean, and I was surprised by that. But there's some areas here, if I scratch my pen over, can kind of hear how rough that sounds, and that's what that support leaves behind. And of course you can sand that down and clean it up, but thankfully I didn't, so that I could show you that illustration there. So yeah, that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid that as much as possible. The other problem with supports is that they leave a large opportunity for failure. So if you're looking at something like this little male canister off to his side, that's just a huge gap there. And let's say it starts to fail on this bottom layer, on this very first layer, because we print from bottom to top, right? Well, anything above that is going to be useless, because if the first layer fails, then everything above that is going to be off. And you'll see all sorts of jagged layers, and if it gets bad enough, that's how you get that spaghetti. That's how you get that disgusting 3D printed spaghetti that you want to avoid. So the other option, you know, throwing it on its side, we still have tons of overhangs and different areas that are going to cause a lot of issues. So what's the solution? It doesn't seem like there's any way that you can print this that would make any sense. Well, the quick kind of SparkNotes answer is to slice it up. And it's nice to slice things on specific seams, and it also is extremely dependent on the size of the 3D print. It's also extremely dependent on the material that you're using, what kind of printing, what kind of printer you're using, all these different things. But for a standard PLA FDM machine, I would probably split this up into a few different parts. Maybe even just as a quick example, just doing a slice right along the middle of this. And what that would help solve is that it would give us a base of this, all these different areas to print up from here up, and not have too much, too many parts that are going to create a huge overhang. And then from the bottom, we would print that other slice this way up and have these legs. We might mess with angle and some other stuff, but that would help us avoid a lot of having a bunch of overhangs on this area as well. So trying to avoid all those supports, and then from there we have an extremely clean line cut from the body. All we do is peg those two pieces, or key them if you're familiar with that term, essentially creating a, I don't have any examples on my desk right now, but essentially creating a keyed area so that that piece can slot right into the other one and line up perfectly. And from there it's just a matter of some sanding, some priming, some gluing, and a little bit of cleanup, and it's going to look pretty nice, I think, depending on the quality of your printer, of course. So today, we're not doing that though, but I did want to kind of give a base cover of all that before we really get into it. So for us, we're worried about full color sandstone. So with that, we actually don't have to worry about undercuts or overhangs. Undercuts a little bit, but overhangs and worrying too much about all that isn't going to be that big of an issue for us. We have a lot more leniency in that area for sure. But what we do want to make sure is that all of our parts are touching and that we can create a watertight mesh. And that's something that's true for all 3D prints. So I kind of want to keep this a little bit more general and universal as much as I can, and then go more into the specifics for the full color sandstone after we get there. I'm going to try to keep my poly paint and my color on this through the entirety of the sculpt. So we're going to do a couple things to prepare for that, and I'll talk about those as I go as well. So let's start by preparing this little dude, our little Borky boy, and making him watertight. So I'm just going to start, it doesn't really matter, I'm just going to start with the base of the character, start looking at his eyes here, these buttons, and begin working on those first. So what does it mean to make a mesh watertight? Well, a watertight mesh would not have any holes or any additional floating parts. So I'm going to use my move brush and turn on backface masking. And if you look here, we have some weird stuff going on there. I'm just going to kind of clean that up and pull that button down into the base mesh there of the head, and do that all around here, and just do a little bit of cleanup. Make sure that these areas don't have any weird, awkward gaps in there, and that looks all pretty good. And once we merge those, there's a really easy way that you can check on all this stuff as well, and I'll show you that. We'll just kind of begin quickly adjusting some of this stuff and pulling it in. Make sure that there's no weird holes around these inner circles. Might be a little bit of a weird edge here, maybe not. I think we're good. So leave that. I'll do the strings last, the part where he's sewn together last. For our ears, I think these are fine. Transparency, just to make sure that we don't have any holes there. Everything's kind of meeting into each other. Around the stuffing up here, I might want to line that up a little bit better. Not sure why this is darkening when I select this. My material seems to be a little screwed up, maybe. Honestly, I'm not sure. It's a very strange interaction. So let's try this. Let's do RGB. Ah, it's masked, of course. Okay. That's what was going on there. I was a little confused. Let's undo that. Clean that up. Alright. So I want to make sure that this is a little bit more clean. All these stuffing places here. I still have some subdivs, so I can kind of set this down a little bit and maybe line up things a little bit better in some of these areas. I have other pieces of this stuffing in these cracks, so I kind of want to fill these in as best as I can and just have it look kind of like he's torn here, or a little bit bursting out of his seams, or whatever you want to say. And down here as well, I have another one. And I've kind of poly painted the inner portion of some of this to make it black. As you can see, that clean line there. Just to create some actual shading in there, and then bring more emphasis to the stuffing that we have bursting out of his seams. So continue to line up some of this, get it nice and clean, making sure that we don't have too many gaps or anything like that. Actually, 0 gaps is what we're aiming for. The Alpha, what's going on? The Alpha and Rohit joining us. Welcome to the stream, guys. We are working on some 3D printing stuff today. And specifically, my Art War 2 companion for today, Bork. If you guys remember him, me working on him. I'm now finished with my Art War 2 character and the companion here. And I think the link is still down in the description, the first link there. That'll take you to my Art War 2 forum page, the challenge. And I have a bunch of work in progress images and all sorts of other stuff that you can check out from starting from just a little sphere onto all of this stuff that we got here. That rhymed a little bit, and that wasn't intentional. All right. So cleaning up the stuffing, trying to make that fit, make sure that our legs, and before we even look at our little tied up pieces here, let's make sure that our geometry is pressed together nicely here through these different areas. Make sure that there's no gaps running through these different areas. I think it looks good. Next up, the tongue. The tongue is going to be a little bit different and maybe a tad bit difficult, so I'm going to hide everything except for the tongue and the lower body piece here that I have, just the way I have it split up. You can see here how I poly painted that to give an illusion of shadow in these different areas. And that's fine. I'll unhide everything so you can see that in action as well. So for the tongue, and we might actually be good. Right here it's a little bit hard to tell. So, oh, not what I meant to do. I meant to turn off the poly paint there so I can see a little bit easier. I am going to hide part of my tongue and look inside here, and I can see where that is colliding. I think that looks good, but you can see that there's a little bit of a gap right there. So what I want to do, I'm gonna drop down to a low subdivision level, mask this off, and all this stuff that I'm doing right now, if you have no idea what's going on and why I'm doing this, it's to make the mesh watertight. And if you don't know what that means, you'll see here shortly once I go through and actually apply all these changes and start merging things together through Dynamesh. You can see all that here firsthand. So pulling some of this down, making sure that they're touching here. Put our color back on this piece. So there's that kind of paint that I have going on, trying to give the illusion that there's a little bit of shadow in the mouth, and it's pure black, so it's gonna divert your attention away from that area. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for there. Another thing that I want to worry about right now, while we're here looking at the tongue, is the thickness of the tongue. So I'm worried that I plan on printing this guy at maybe 2.5 inches tall. Kind of depends on price and thicknesses and all that. So back here, remember that there's all these minimum support wall thicknesses, unsupported wall thicknesses, and there's just a minimum thickness for detail and engraved detail. So it kind of depends, even for your escape hole, which we'll look at doing later. But all this is, you know, around 2 to 3 millimeters for all of these things. So if I'm going to have this tongue that's sticking out and flowing down, that would be considered, in my opinion, an unsupported wall. So I need that to be at least 3 millimeters in thickness. And just kind of eyeballing this from experience of having something that's like 2.5 inches tall, I probably need to thicken this up a bit. But if you want to measure actually here and measure physically, he's not at scale yet, so we'll wait to do that. I am going to thicken the tongue up now though, and if you guys want me to give more information on getting an actual really exact measurement here in ZBrush, we can look at doing that later down in the pipeline as well. So I'm just going through here with my move back face masking. I'm just adding a little bit of thickness to our tongue. And get a view of what that looks like. Just kind of thicken that up. And we will return to that if need be, depending on scale and all that later down the road. So next up on our list of making sure that things are print ready here is all these little ropes that we have tying things together. So we'll look at that. So I want to make sure that these are all watertight. First of all, some of these might not even have end caps on. It looks like I did run a close holes op on these, so I think they're good for the most part. It looks, oh, look, I think these are just the only ones that are missing, so close holes on that. It's really not necessary at this point. Let's roll back. I am doing a close holes with this material selected just so that I can get the material and color applied on there correctly. And just fill object just to make sure. So it doesn't really matter if those have end caps, but if there are any holes in those meshes when I do merge these together, it might cause some issues. So it might as well kind of nip it in the bud right now and make sure that we can have as few of problems as possible in the future. So looking at these, making sure that there's no areas that are kind of popping out. I can use transparency if that helps. And I think for most of these we're pretty good. There might be some that are really close like you see down here, but those should be fine as well. Here's one that's kind of sticking out, so this is the kind of thing that I want to avoid. I want to make sure that those are fully in there, touching the geometry, so that when I perform a Dynamesh, we're all set to go. I think I've already kind of done this pass on here previously, just to make sure that things are kind of visually consistent. And I think we are good on all of those. So most of this stuff, like I said, it's really helpful if while you're going through the process, you can think about these things beforehand. It's going to save you a lot of trouble down the road. So here I am at this point now, and I really don't have that much work, or extra work I should say, that I need to do to make some of these things work out for us. So that's extremely, extremely nice. Next up, we can go ahead and start merging some stuff together. But first, let's make sure that this is nice and watertight as well. Turn off perspective so it's just a little easier to rotate around some of this. And a few of these rings are going to need to be modified. So you can see that they're floating off the surface a little bit here. Definitely not what we want if we're going to be dynameshing this or doing any kind of operation that would require merging. Not going to be good. So I'm just going to grab my transpose tool, turn on backface masking, click relatively somewhere where I can push this in at a straight angle, and just click and drag that in. And it looks like should be all good there. Check these ones. You see these little holes popping up there? That's just from the geometry stretching in certain areas. If I smooth this out, you can see that it's actually fine. And I think once I dynamesh those, they will be fine as well. If we're getting a little extra texture on those, I'll have to smooth them out and then re-perform that dynamesh operation. This piece here I've already kind of merged down, or drafted back, sorry, to make sure that there are no undercuts there. So that's perfect, and the rest of these should be good to go as well, I believe. Let's make sure our thickness here is good. Yep, we are good. All right, so that's all watertight. No open holes. And our little extra sewn parts here that we have going on. Now we definitely have an issue here. And this is going to be maybe one of the more difficult things that you're going to have to deal with in your characters for 3D printing. And it's about making sacrifices between design and actual 3D print feasibility. So it's a tough call to make, and you have to choose your hill that you want to die on for accuracy of the character. But for here, it's kind of hidden, and I've done this on purpose with this in mind. It's somewhat hidden inside of the character and the canister that are pressed up against each other, so it's a pretty small gap in here. So I am totally fine with filling in this area. And I need to fill in a lot of this area because it's going to cause a lot of issues down the line for us. If there are any holes in here, I can foresee this causing a lot of problems. Another solution is to simply slice these off, depending on what you're printing with. Separate them off as their own separate piece that you'll print separately, and then you can kind of connect it in, create some registration marks, which we conveniently kind of already have there, and then glue it all back together after the fact. So we have to be a little creative here. If I hide our canister, you can kind of see these little gaps in here, and they're really small. They're really not a big deal, and I don't think they will be noticed really if we create if we create some geometry to fill in these gaps. So there's a number of ways that you can do that. I'll probably just insert a sphere typically and kind of work to close these holes in these gaps. Another way, since this is kind of already a tube in this basic shape, I can just duplicate the tube of geometry that we already have here. And I can probably just wiggle this and rotate it into a good enough position to where it starts closing off that hole. And since it's the same color, I think it's really going to blend in and probably be the best solution that we have here. Another idea that I'm having right now is that we might want to press the canister up against the character a little bit more, just to have it tighter up against the character so that there's more of a registration for that geometry. If it's barely touching it, it's gonna barely register on that connection point. Think of it in a similar way that if I connected our ear to our head, and if our ear was, let's see here, do this, was extremely thin, and then we 3D printed our ear, we might have a lot of problems with something like that. That might cause the piece to break off, that might cause it to just completely fail, which is kind of the more typical situation that you'll run into. So we want to be aware of that. We want to keep things as thick as we can without sacrificing too much of the design. Like I said, you have to kind of pick and choose your hill that you want to die on. But for us, what we want to do is possibly move this in a little bit. I don't know. I think we have enough of a, we might have enough of a registration here. One way that I can tell is by selecting some of that, turning it off, just hiding it, and see how much of the geometry is actually kind of touching here. And really it's not that much. Really it's just right here at the tip of the curve of the body. You can look at it from the side. So I probably do actually want to bring some of this in. And we can kind of try doing that here as best as we can. Let's clean up some stuff here. Merge some of our little ropes together. I'm just going to subdivide these, make sure they're at a higher resolution, merge down, have all that geometry, and we'll work on just kind of pushing this together. I'm probably just going to move this in manually with my transpose tool. There are probably some better, more accurate ways to do that, but I say we just do this for now. I have perspective turned off. That's going to make it a little bit easier for me to line some stuff up here. And I'm just going to draw out a nice straight long line and then push it in from there. So I'm really not going to push this in very much at all. So I'm just clicking and holding shift. And really that's not too far at all, but already I can see that that's touching quite a bit more. We can hide that again and see how much more of a registration we have there. So that's great. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for. It looks like we might be able to push it a little bit further. Let's see here. Let's see what we're looking like. I say we go with that. I think that's a good kind of balance between having it not look like it's, you know, sinking into him and also giving us something that's actually feasible to print. So a little bit of a registration in there for that to connect. That should be a decent size, depending on, again, what scale we print at. But we will cross that bridge, I guess, when we get to it. So I'm just gonna split off, let's see, this rope and this bottom one, making sure to select a point. split hidden. And again, for people that are just popping in here, if you ever see me pop up a quick menu, do a shortcut, and you have no idea what I just did, just ask, and I can show you guys where all that is. For example, the split hidden operation is under geometry, I believe under modify topology, or actually, no, I'm sorry. It's just under all these split operations under subtool. So tool, subtool, split, and then there's a bunch of different split operations. I use the split hidden operation. That's probably the one that I use the most. This is just a menu up here that I created, a custom menu that I have set to a hotkey that I can just pop up wherever my mouse is. All right, so let's fill in a couple gaps here, and then I think we will be good on our little side canister piece over here. So duplicate our rope. Remember I said that you can use a sphere or whatever you have to kind of fill in any of these gaps. I'm just going to use a duplicate of the same geometry here, reconstruct our subdivs a little bit, make it easier to work with. And I'm actually going to do a quick poly group here, real quick, and down here as well. I'm just doing this to make it a little bit easier for me to select each of these. So I'm manually just using my move brush, filling in some of these areas. Doesn't have to be perfect by any means. I'm just kind of trying to do this quick so that we can get back and I can show you what that's going to look like. Alright, so we've started to close off that hole. It looks like that one's pretty much closed off completely. Down there it's pretty close. A better solution here, what we're going to do instead, I'm going to delete this. What I would actually prefer to do is grab our cylindrical piece of geometry. A little bit of a more clean solution. Split hidden, duplicate, and I'm just going to turn on move backface masking. So I got my move brush, backface masking turned on, and I'm just going to fill in all that. And that's actually pretty thick as well. That's pretty close to the actual thickness of that rope. Down here as well. All of that. And it doesn't matter how far that goes into the actual geometry. Not a big deal. There's a little bit of thickness here. So again, with the color, I think it's going to blend in just fine. A little thick on this side, this upper piece. Can maybe soften that, bring it down. If I was splitting this up into a ton of different parts and I was the one printing it, I would definitely, I would probably not be making this kind of sacrifice, just because I would want that possible gap there and working with that and being able to create a registration mark there, create two separate prints, really not that hard to sync them back up as long as you have those marks here. I think those would be perfect for lining that up. But because Shapeways would be the ones printing this, and it's a material whose resolution is really not as good as as you could get out of, I think, PLA or ABS. It's just kind of dependent on what kind of printer you have. But yeah, I think that's going to be fine for our purposes. The telltale sign will be once we start merging this together and getting to see what that actually looks like. Now, I'm going to start merging some geometry here through Dynamesh, and when I do that, a thing that you really want to keep in mind during this step of the process is that Dynamesh can remember one of two things. It can remember your poly paint, so that's your color information, or it can remember your poly groups. And if you aren't familiar with what poly groups are, I can show you here real quick. We will merge together a couple things. So here I have some buttons and some ropes, and the buttons are red and the ropes are a dark gray. If I turn on my poly frame though, Shift F, you can see that each one of these has a different color assigned to it. These are what are called poly groups, and these poly groups allow me to create quick selections of this different geometry. And with that, I can polygroup different pieces of geometry. So now these are polygrouped, and I can't select an individual piece of geometry between these two anymore. I can only select the two because they're both polygrouped the same. I can select that though, and I can select this button. I can select this button, but these two are stuck together unless I group them separately. Now I can kind of select those individually. So that's what polygroups are, and here's the poly paint. So Dynamesh can only remember one of those two things. So when I activate Dynamesh to start merging geometry together, we are going to see this take place. So let's start with our body. So we have two pieces of geometry here, two different polygroups. If I turn off the line, actually three different polygroups, 3 or 4. Yep, let's quick save. And another thing that I'm probably going to do is fill in our mouth a little bit because it's a little bit deep. I don't know, maybe. We'll think about it. I might be filling in the mouth a little bit. Just get rid of unnecessary holes. So here we are. 3, 4 polygroups, 2 different colors. I'm going to Dynamesh. I did a quick save. Let's start off with a pretty low-res Dynamesh. The scale of this is pretty small. It's 0.5 units. Normally stuff in ZBrush works best around 2 units cubed. So let's see what a 1K Dynamesh results us with. And it's a pretty quick Dynamesh. You can see that we've lost a lot of resolution here. We still have our poly paint though, but if I press Shift F or activate poly frame, you can see that everything is a singular polygroup now. And maybe that's not what you're looking for, but for our purposes, we want the poly paint. Polygroups aren't going to matter too much. So we did lose a lot of resolution there, so let's undo, and we're going to try a little bit higher res. But first, let's turn off our poly paint. I'll do a 1K Dynamesh. So I've turned off my poly paint. I've toggled it off with the paintbrush icon. And I'm just going to do another Dynamesh at 1K here. So I Dynameshed. Let's turn our poly paint back on, and you can see that our poly paint is now gone. It's gone forever. And that is because if I press Shift F, you can see that my poly groups are now saved and retained between these different objects. So poly groups or poly paint, it's one or the other, and there's no way around that unless the only real, man, a lot of undos here. There we go, all the way back. The only real way to get around that is if you Dynamesh with poly paint turned off, and then reproject your poly paint from a previous mesh back on there. So I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe I need close to a 4K resolution because this is so small. So we're going to try that. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to compute. And I'm going to change my material here just so I can show you something else as well. So we'll start that Dynamesh. And the other thing that I want to show you, oh wow, that was really fast. And it's like almost 2.5 million polys. So a thing that happened there is that our material changed. And that's because Dynamesh can't remember your material information and your poly paint information. So you just need to reapply that. So M, standard brush, we'll just click fill object and fill that material in there. So let's see what we're working with here after a quick little merge. We're at around 2.5 million polys. Before we Dynamesh that together, we were at 7 million. Really, that's not necessary for the kind of resolution that we're looking for, though. Not really at all, I don't think. Let's toggle off our poly paint, and we'll do a selection here. So holding Control and Shift on your keyboard, you have your bunch of different selection tools. Select rectangle. I'm going to use the select lasso and hide the entire back part of this, and we can start to see the inside of this. If you cannot see the inside of your mesh, you need to turn on double, and double can be turned on in your display properties at the bottom of your tool menu. So looking here, I can see that there are a bunch of places giving me some problems along the seam here. I'm not too worried about these because they will be filled in with rope, and that won't be an issue. These will be filled in with stuffing, so that geometry will fill in these holes. This one, though, this is definitely something that we're going to have to fix. And the way that we're going to do that, I said that we could fill in some geometry there. That's definitely one way that we can do that. But let's see here if we can fill that, or do a slightly different way to fill that in. Khan, shouting out their Instagram, well, thank you. And Ahmed says, keep up the great work, man, and I believe has donated €2. Well, thank you very much, Ahmed. That's the first time anyone has ever done that, so I'm super appreciative of that. Thank you, and I do hope that all this stuff is extremely helpful for some of you guys. Thank you, very appreciative, seriously, that's very awesome of you. Khan says, do you remember me? Khan, how could I forget the great and almighty Khan? Maybe we can do a quick Instagram search on, what was it? CK Creatives, or CK Creative Studio, sorry. Alright guys, so real quick, while Khan gets himself sorted out, we are going to fill this in. And the way we're going to fill it in is not with geometry like what we did with on the ropes, but instead with a close holes operation. So I'm just being a little quick here with my selection tools, using my selection lasso, and we're getting up to our mouth area. If you don't feel comfortable working kind of with the inverse of your polys, the backside of the normals, really it just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of practice, and stuff kind of starts making sense. It can be a little confusing when you're looking at something like this, but just try it a few times and it's really not that hard. Can you look at Instagram messages, says Khan. I can look at Instagram messages. I believe. I will not do so right this very second though, but if you did send me something on Instagram, I'll definitely check it out. Just let me know. So let's hide some more. Our lippers up here as well. And here we are. So if I inverse our selection, you can see what we got hidden right now. So all of this is off the table. We're just looking at this stuff here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, it might be a little bit easier if I turn my poly paint off for some of you so you can see what's going on. It's definitely easier for me. I'm going to use my mask tool, my mask lasso, holding the control key, selecting this, and just pressing Control W. And what Control W does is it polygroups whatever you have masked. In this case, the geometry that I just selected. From here, I can just Control Shift click, get everything visible again, even turn on polypaint if I want. We'll leave it off. But since that is all selected, I'll select all this, inverse our selection. I'm going to delete hidden, so that is under Tool, Geometry, Modify Topology, I believe. Delete hidden, yeah. Sometimes I use my shortcuts so much that I just forget where everything is normally at. But I don't know, it's kind of a good thing. It means my shortcuts are working and they're helping a lot. So delete hidden, that geometry is gone forever. Forever. So we're gonna use our standard brush, MRGB, select that black color, and run a close holes operation, which is in the same palette that I just showed you. So now what we're working with is the same inner mouth shape, but now that that is gone, it's sliced off, and we can actually even come through here, this different area, hide a bunch of stuff, and clean up that closed holes op that we just did if we want to make that a little bit cleaner. So let's do this, turn off our poly paint here so you can see again. So I can just hold shift. This is fairly high poly, so for me, just coming in here and making sure that that's a little bit cleaned up. Some of these corners of the mouth, I want to be a little bit careful as it gets towards the edge there. See that? I want to be careful that I don't smooth that out. So just a little here. I'm also using the alternate smooth, otherwise known as relax. So holding shift, smoothing, letting go of the shift key, still smoothing. It's called relaxing. Using that around the edges of the mouth, trying to make this a little bit thicker. These corners can cause some issues depending on how tight they get, especially on the inside of mouths or any kind of crevice. So working to clean that up a little bit in here, as you can see. But for the most part, that's going to be all black in there, hardly seen. We shallowed it, so all of that is going to be extremely helpful for us. Let's fill in our material as well. Make sure that that's all set up, ready to go. So at that point, at this point, we have successfully merged together our two hemispheres, I guess, of our little doggy boy here. So that's worked out pretty well. The next step, I think, will be to merge down our ears. So I'm just making sure that these are at their highest subdiv levels. They are. So I'm perfectly comfortable merging down here. Got these merged down. Run a Dynamesh. And we should be all set. And we can kind of double check on some of this stuff. Looks good. Looks good to me. All right. We'll do another quick save. Just make sure we don't lose too much in case something crazy happens. What else we got here? Let's just go crazy. Let's take our body, our ears, and merge down. We got the stuffing there. Merge down, got the button eyes, merge down again. Have our tongue. Now these are still separate meshes. Keep that in mind. We have to Dynamesh these. All right. I think we are good. Let me look at this one. I think there's one little tweak I might want to make over here, and there is. So I'm just masking this off, pulling it around a little bit. Popping through there a tiny bit. Not a huge problem, really. Alright, so let's run a Dynamesh on here. And we can see what we get. Hopefully things don't break too much. Let's start off looking at this connection point up here. I think that turned out pretty well. There might be some corrections we want to make in terms of poly paint as some stuff starts to bleed over there. Looking at our button eyes. These are probably going to have a lot of issues. You can see get really thin in some of these areas. What I would like to do actually is draft part of this back. So you can see these super thin areas right here. It's very thin geometry and we're getting some gaps in here. This is a no-no for 3D printing. This is the kind of stuff that you want to avoid. So I should have recognized that. We'll probably step back, undo our Dynamesh, and we will draft these down. Over here, actually let's step forward again. Over here it should be fine. Could maybe stand to be a little bit corrected. Nah, I think it's good. The other one definitely though, for sure. So undo. Actually before, let's just check on everything so we can kind of make the fixes all at one time here. A little bit of poly paint correction there, and down here I think we're looking good. So just a little bit of drafting back on our button eyes, we should be good. Let's check the tongue too. Beautiful. That's actually perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. All right. So we'll fix our button eyes and be on our merry way. So let's grab this rope here, split hidden, split it off to its own piece, and we're going to draft it back. Raphael, what's going on? Says hello and nice model, very clean. Thank you very much. This is the companion character for my Art War II competition model. Let's see here. Akala and Bork, final image. So Akala, I think you were hanging out with us on some of the streams where I was working on her. So that's the final render of her. And then, of course, her little companion, Bork, down here. I thought it would be fun to get him ready for 3D printing, specifically using full color sandstone, which is a material on shapeways.com. This stuff here. So we're looking at doing that right now. And giving a bunch of 3D printing tips along the way. So hopefully some of this stuff is helpful for you guys. I know it's helpful for me to just kind of talk about this stuff on occasion and make sure that I remember it. This one, we're going to draft this back first. So there's a lot of ways to draft geometry. I like to use the move back face masking for quick little things like this. This is just a quick little fix, super easy. This one we might want to fill in the geometry there. Instead, what I'm going to do though is move, hold control, move it down, and that'll fill in that gap. And we could blend that if we wanted. I think I'm just gonna leave it how it is, maybe kind of fill in the gap a little bit. I think the resolution of this will be so small though, it's not gonna matter. Can maybe pull it a little tighter as well. Let's merge it down, and we'll grab some polygons here. Make a mask and pull that down. This is just a little bit of adjusting, making sure that we don't have any gaps, making sure that it doesn't look too terrible. And the other adjustment I want to make is thinning this piece, so it's more of a hole filler and less of a sore thumb sticking out. So just like that. So filling in that hole, same color, same material. I think that should work. So run a Dynamesh, let that figure things out. See how that did here. And let's take a look. Beautiful. So our geometry, I would prefer to have a higher resolution geometry while working on this. That would require me to scale this up as I was working on it. But like I said, for the scale and the size of the actual physical print that we're going for, I think this will be more than enough. Katie says, what's up? How are things? Things are good. We're looking at doing some 3D printing, or some 3D printing prep, I guess, for printing some full color sandstone over on Shapeways. And I'm giving as many 3D printing tips as I can while we go. The other thing that we're going to combine next are these guys here. So let's merge down. And this will let us know if we have any major issues with any of this. So quick Dynamesh, see how we're looking. Little bit of problem there, some problems here. Actually a fair bit of problems with most of these. So if you don't know what I'm talking about here, let's look at this one first. So this might not look like an issue to you. What's going on here is it might be a little bit hard to tell, so we'll kind of select in on this. So our geometry that we've just combined down is actually causing a little thin piece of geometry to be made inside of here. And that's what this thin strip is that we're getting here. That's what this is. And that's a big no-no for 3D printing. It's going to cause a lot of issues. So what we want to do is, much like the eye that we had on our guy, man, I'm just rhyming all over the place unintentionally, and I apologize. We want to merge some geometry down in there to prevent those thin strips from occurring. Similar here, it's a little bit more obvious because some of it is actually touching, not all of it, but enough to cause some thin strips of geometry here and here. We want to avoid that and start to clean that up. So most of these are causing the same exact problem. So the quickest way to do this is probably just going to be, let's see real quick, split those back off. Probably just going to be a move back face mask on most of these, and just kind of manually tweak each one. I'm doing auto groups there. That'll be a little time consuming, but I do think it's going to be the fastest way, the fastest and most simple way to do that. Another way that might work could be a similar thing to what we did to the button on the eye. Just kind of duplicating the geometry, getting a little bit of geo underneath that. It's not going to be as clean though as what we want, I don't think. So what I recommend instead is what I just suggested: the move, the back face masking turned on, and thickening these into the mesh here. And to make sure that those are going through, we are going to create a little selection here. So let's figure this out. off his little tongue there. And I'm just kind of hiding anything that's not necessary right now. And we'll hide these as well. All right. So that is now touching. That's going into the mesh. And we just crashed. Hopefully we get a quick save. Did it? I don't know. That was pretty quick. It's a pretty quick save. Although we were pretty low on our poly count, so I would guess that it probably did save. Ramsey says, why don't you use the Boolean union? So the Boolean operation. Boolean takes a pretty long time for stuff like this. We're trying to get some, let me see here. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. We want our most recent recovered tool. I think that should be good. So why aren't you using the Boolean union? We could absolutely use the Boolean, live Boolean, which is the newest function to ZBrush, or one of the newest functions. It's definitely the most, or I guess the biggest update, I would say, to ZBrush that we got out of 4R8. I use it all the time. It's awesome for doing some negative booleans, but for our cases here, for what we're working with, a quick little Dynamesh to combine geometry is going to be more than enough, especially for the resolution that we're looking at. If I wanted to get some really just like perfectly precise, clean geometry that had all the same geometry from the previous pieces, because the way that live Boolean works, it actually retains your geometry and then only creates changes where intersecting meshes are occurring. So this would still have all the edge loops here that it does right now, and then where these two are touching, it would kind of stitch those together. But like I said, the Dynamesh operation that we're doing right now is more than enough for what we're looking at. And it's definitely much faster and more fluid to work this way. For live Boolean, if I wanted to work with each of these individual meshes, and then kind of live Boolean them in, I don't need live Boolean on since it's an additive method. I'd have to come down to Boolean, click Make Boolean, it creates a separate subtool. I have to go to the separate subtool and then work on it from there. It gets a little bit too long to create something simple, check how it's looking, if it's merging together, if it's working well, and then go back and forth from there. So you could probably find a work method or a pipeline to where you could use live Boolean and just kind of set up everything that needs to be merged, get it all in a really good place, and then live Boolean it all like one time. But like I said, live Boolean takes a while, and if you were to do that with, I don't know, 20 million polys, whatever we had originally, or like for the full character, it was like 50 mil. That's going to take a long time, and I've never actually done a live Boolean on anything over probably 15 million polys. So, and that took a long time. So I don't know. This is, like I said, more fluid, more quick, and definitely the preferred method for something like the resolution that we would get out of the full color sandstone on Shapeways. So for all of this, making sure that some stuff is touching. My throat is my throat is not okay with all the stocking. So I'm gonna give it a break for 5 seconds and come through here and clean all this up and get it ready. And maybe find some decent music to listen to. Let's see. what are we feeling? Let's do some upbeat music. I don't really know what genre upbeat is, but let's do it. Let's get upbeat. Khan says back face mask. Yes, so we're using move back face masking currently. Get a really simple brush stroke that we can do quickly and consistently on here. Almost done. I think there's only a few left here. Alright, so let's take a look. Merge down, Dynamesh again, and see how we did. Start up top, work our way around. Looks clean, looks clean. Little corner there, might need some adjusting. Looks good. All looks good here. Let's see, where was that corner? It should be fine. I won't worry about it. But there we go, merging our stitching in. Making sure that we don't have too many gaps. Avoid those as best as we can. And what do we have left? Just a few things. Just our canister, our ropes from the canister, our rocks, which we can also look at. These are decimated right now. I don't know how many of these rocks I even want to keep, or if I even want to keep any of them. I think they're kind of cool for a little stand, but they take up a lot of volume. And because Shapeways prints are by volume, price per volume, right? That can get pretty expensive. Might be able to work something out though, I don't know. Honestly, even one rock will be the price of, that'll like double the price of the print. So even if I did, if I can select it, just this one, we're looking at doubling the price of this. So probably gonna avoid that. Shapeways can get pretty pricey pretty quick. So let's definitely try to avoid that, I guess. We can figure out something else, maybe like a little stand for him, some other stuff, and we might just print him as is on his feet. I might have to do some flattening to make sure that it's pretty loud, so that we have some level ground that he can stand on, so that he's not quite so warbly, but we can look at that. Let's see here. Raphael says, how much will a regular print cost? That kind of depends. So we're doing Shapeways right now, the full color sandstone. Looking at some of the other materials. The full color sandstone is one of their cheapest materials on their website. It's got the $1 sign out of 5, whatever that means. I've 3D printed some stuff previously, but I'm sorry, I don't think I have my cube on my workshop anymore. Or yes, I do. Let's see here. So this is a solid cube right now, just to give you guys an idea of how Shapeways prices stuff. Let's see, this 100% inches. So this is a 2.5 inch solid cube of material. 2.5 inches. That's pretty small. This little Pikachu figurine from bottom of base to top of ear is about 2.5 inches. So imagine a cube roughly that tall, that wide, that deep. And you can look at some of the prices here. These are pretty expensive, but that is a cube that is solid. We will definitely have some gaps in here. This obviously doesn't fill up the entire volume of a cube, probably less than half of it. And then on top of that, we can hollow him out. And after we hollow him out, he's gonna be a lot lighter, a lot less volume, and a lot cheaper. I can probably get it down to like $15 or $20 for full color sandstone. That's typically what I can get for around 2.5 inches. It just really depends. It'll also depend on like what scale I finally decide to print at. I'll probably order just one of these, and depending on what price I can get it at, maybe put it up on a Shapeways store. I don't have a marketplace on Shapeways right now. Most of the stuff that I do is a lot of fan art, so most recent print that I got was this little Bulbasaur dude. I got him down pretty cheap. So those are some price examples so that you can see that. I don't know where our little Bulba buddy went. Here he is. It's a little full-color sandstone Bulbasaur, and I hollowed him out ever so slightly. He's so small, though, I couldn't really hollow him out all too much, but we were still able to bring the price down on that quite a bit. All right. So rocks. Rocks are a no-go. We'll say no to the rocks, for sure. If anything, maybe like the topmost portion of one rock, like that. Like a sliver of rock. That's all. That's all you get. Let's see. MRGB, close holes. So maybe something like that. I don't know. I would honestly prefer to have this on my desk without a stand. In terms of weight, though, he might tip over if he doesn't have a stand. I don't know. That would be disappointing. I wouldn't want that. Can look at him, see how his weight is aligned, try to figure it out. I feel like a tripod, so three-point connection to the ground, 3 legs. I feel like that should be enough for stability, but because of this one, he might end up tipping forward on that leg, falling forward and then catching himself. That'd be unfortunate, especially with this over here. This might cause more weight in that front right quadrant, causing him to tip over. So I kind of want to avoid that. So maybe a stand, I don't know. We'll have to see. Katie says, don't forget a hole for the extra material to come out. Yeah, so actually with Shapeways and specifically with full color sandstone, like I was just shown there on the Bulbasaur, you actually, if you put a hole isn't actually going to let extra material come out. You actually have to hollow your model, and you have to hollow it and put a hole. If you hollow it, it's not going to actually know that there's any inner level of geometry. So you want to hollow it, and you want to create a little hole there, and no extra material is going to come out. It's actually not going to print any of that extra material. That depends on what printing process you're doing, though. And for us, for full color sandstone, we will be hollowing him out and going for probably around a 3mm thickness, which I think is 0.12 inches? What is it? 0.12? Yeah. So about 0.12 inches. I round up just to be safe. The 0.3 is the larger of the two, so I'll probably make sure that every piece of geometry is roughly 0.12 inches in its most thin areas. You can go down to 0.2, or I'm sorry, yeah, 0.12 inches or 3mm. You can go down to 2mm for supported walls, but I'm really not even going to deal with that, just to make sure that everything's, you know, thick enough and solid and good to print. For the embossed detail, you want it at 0.4mm, or for engraved detail, same. We are more than enough on all of that, so that won't be an issue at all. Let's see here. So back to this guy. The last thing that we need to do, other than making sure that he's not like tipping and all that, the last thing we need to do in terms of combining parts is just to combine our ropes here and combine our final little canister of geometry. So let's look at doing that. So merge down all of our ropes. Let's hide that. I want to make sure that these are all touching here. That looks good to me. Not what I wanted. Come on, Dynamesh. There we go. Alright, so Dynamesh that, bring it up to 4K. Merge down. Get all of this. Dynamesh at 4K. And let's see how that did. Nope, didn't want to slice it. Although that is a good way to take a peek inside sometimes. Actually, that'll be, so there's a little bit of a area here and there, but those will be inserted in the character, so those should be fine. That looks good. That should be fine as well. Let's do this. I wanna up the res on this a little bit. So let's do deformation. Size up. Where'd you go? Really not that big of a size difference. Got a little bit of a higher resolution Dynamesh. Not a big deal. Merge down here. The character looks fine. There's just a little bit of detail on this canister that we don't want to lose. So just kind of increasing the size on him. Just enough that we can Dynamesh. See what kind of resolution we can get, and hopefully clean up our boy. Looks like that didn't actually work. For full color sandstone, we might get some issues there. So let's undo back down to our base size. Let's try our plugin over here, Z plugins menu up here. And we are going to use the Dynamesh Master, and we're going to try to force it to give us, I don't know, we'll say 8 million polys, and try that. So let's get a quick save. And let's try that. I've had problems with Dynamesh Master in the past not working out. Sometimes ZBrush has a lot of trouble attempting to Dynamesh anything over 5 million polys, and it's actually doing that right now. You can see that the operation there isn't working out. So this might be a good time to attempt to use, let's undo here, get on back. This might be a good time to attempt to use our live Boolean operations to merge all that together, just so that we can keep the resolution on some of this. So to do that, let's see if I undo here real quick. Okay. So let's try to do a quick live Boolean, or just a Boolean operation to make it a Boolean mesh. And we'll do that now. Just so that we don't lose any of that additional resolution that we had in there. Is that Dynamesh right now? No, it is not. Okay, it's just poly grouped the same for some reason. I could roll back to, let's see. I kind of want to roll back to an old quick save so that we can make sure that we get the full resolution on this, and I could do that, but honestly this is like plenty for full color sandstone, so really not worried about that. Live Boolean, let's make that a Boolean mesh. We'll take the time to combine those, and hopefully it'll turn out well, and hopefully our resolution is still intact. I have a feeling that our resolution will be fine. I'm just hoping that some of these areas in here will be fine as well. So the geometry shouldn't change. It should only change in one area, and that's where our meshes are touching. Let's see if that's the case. Turn on double, and you can see that we have definitely a lot of issues in here in terms of where the geometry is connecting. You're getting a lot of thin areas, so in here, very small gap, very small hole. We definitely want to fill that in. Up here, Probably want to fill in this gap as well. It's going to cause some issues. This floater here is caused by live boolean, so that's also some stuff that we want to get rid of, which is why I tend not to use live boolean when doing this kind of thing in particular. And some of this up here as well, so some of that thin area. Actually, most of that's fine, but that definitely is not. Let's see how what I can get out of Dynamesh real quick here. Actually, I want to just see something real quick. Beautiful. I think this is our 3D print, guys. It's right here. I think this looks great. A little bit of inflate. Inflate's always fun to play with. Especially if you're sculpting a face and just inflate it at the end. So let's size up. We're at 111, 1 inch cube. Let's just do a deformation unify. So deformation unify, that puts our max dimension, which is our Y in this case, at 2 units. That's what I'm looking for. And I think I'm just gonna try a Dynamesh at this level and see what we can get to. Do a quick save. And let's see how that turns out. Larventhalos, what's going on? Welcome to the stream. Did that really Dynamesh that quickly? Looks like it did. But yes, we are definitely having some Dynamesh issues with our resolution. And this happens from time to time. I've been able to clear it up. Typically with scale, like I said, the Dynamesh master isn't your best friend in the world. Another way that we can clean this up is if you just absolutely can't get it to work, is after you perform your Dynamesh, you can subdivide your geometry, reproject details, or you can Dynamesh it at a slightly lesser resolution, subdivide it up, reproject some information from there, and work with it that way. The last thing I want to show you guys real quick is how to create a hole for some thickness in your mesh. And in this case, we want to get a specific measurement. And I can go into the details of how you can get really specific measurements in here. I don't want to spend too long of time on it though, so instead of going through all that in this stream, since I'm kind of getting close to time here where I need to bounce, I'm just going to show you guys how to create a quick hole and get some thickness on and hollow out your mesh here. Larventhalos says, you're always streaming when I'm at work, but I'm on vacation, so maybe I'll catch a couple this week. Sorry about that. I try to stream at some different times to get some different people in there. It just kind of depends on the time zone. KDZ says, screwed up in Maya, trying to save myself by going back with its history. Yeah, typically in Maya, I'll like every hour just delete all by type history. Just get rid of all that garbage. But it's good that you still have it right now. Hopefully you can get what you need. But yeah, let's do some thickness, guys. There's definitely a few different ways we can go about this. I'm going to show you the oldest trick for doing it. So I just duplicated my mesh, and I'm going to convert that mesh to a cylinder. So tool initialize 212 Y cylinder. It gives us a cylinder here. I am going to crease my edges. And now I have a nice cylinder. And we'll move that down. I'd probably do this a little bit better, a little bit more clean. This isn't going to be exactly what I use because I'm going to fix my resolution problem. I just want to show you guys this before I head out so that you guys can see a majority of the process for prepping something like this. So getting this into position. I am pushing this up into my geometry. You can see transpose. You can see what that looks like. There are some new methods for hollowing out meshes with live boolean that are brand new. But what I'm doing here is the old tried and true method. So having that on subtraction, we'll turn off live boolean. And let's see. We'll duplicate our little cylinder here. So currently I have my little doggo, Borky, here. I have a cylinder, which is set to negative. And we have the Dynamesh palette, which is all we need. But we're not going to actually use the Dynamesh button. We're going to be using the Create Shell. So there within the Dynamesh palette here is Create Shell, and next to that is Thickness. So we're going to merge these down, merge our character down onto our cylinder, just like if we were doing, looks like my Dynamesh is messed up. I need to have Dynamesh turned on Bork here. So let me make sure Dynamesh is turned on. So Dynamesh. So keep that turned on and duplicate that again. So merge down, Dynamesh is on, and I'm going to click Create Shell. The thickness is set to 4 right now. That is the default. I don't know what that's going to look like quite yet. But what's going to happen here, it looks like it's taking a minute to think. Our Dynameshes were going pretty fast there for a little bit, but now it's maybe not so sure. So what Create Shell is going to do is it's going to take this cylinder, it's going to subtract the geometry up around that area, and then for the rest of the inner portion of our model, it's going to create a thickness for it. And it's going to hollow out our model. I probably should have done this on a lower resolution first. I didn't think it was taking that long for our other Dynameshes, so I didn't think this would take that long, but looks like it's taking a little bit longer than what we want. But I can kind of close this and we can retry on a lower res. But that is the quick little process, and then from there, whoops, close the program, thank you. From there, what you would do is we're going to measure our thickness, and depending on what scale our mesh is at, we can increase the thickness or decrease the thickness from there, do a little bit of trial and error to figure out what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and go back here to our quick save. All right. So we got him. Duplicate again. 212 cylinder, same as before. Just do this really quick so I can have it set up. So I'm just going to do a 1K Dynamesh here. It's actually still coming through pretty high res. So let's do like 400. So as you can see here, we lost a lot of our resolution. That's okay. I'm just doing this so that I can show you guys how it works. So we'll grab our cylinder, get it into position. And we'll do it back here on his butt. And I'll make it the same color as this material, just so it blends in. All right, and I think we are good here. So merging down our Borky boy with our cylinder. Try this one more time. Dynamesh, Create Shell, thickness 4, which is the default, have a resolution of 400 on the Dynamesh, and this time it worked out a lot quicker for us. So we can see that it subtracted the hole from the mesh, and if I create a little slice here, you can see that everything within here has a thickness, and that thickness connects and wraps around at this cylinder here. So this is where everything connects. So that inner wall with that outer wall. So now if we printed this, we would be able to hollow it out and save on a ton of material and money. But of course for this, since it's 2 inches, this is much too thin. We needed around 0.12 inches. This is 0.07. So we would need to thicken that up to about that length of my transpose tool right there. So quite a bit. So probably our legs won't even be able to be hollow to make that work. So it's definitely some areas where there would be some problems. But hopefully that illustrates the point so that you guys can see that and understand the steps to take to hollow out your model and get it ready for printing. After this, the only step that you would have to do is, of course, figure out your size, figure out your thickness that you're going to want to subtract from your dude, whatever you're printing, and then of course, do some UVs, create a texture map so that you can, of course, print in that full color sandstone, that beautiful full color sandstone, and order your print from Shapeways. But maybe we'll cover some more of that in the next stream. But I think that's a good place to stop. Let's see, Katie says you could use one of the ears as a plug. Let's see here. We would have to print that as 2 separate pieces of geometry, so you could plug that in. It might be a good idea if you wanted to hollow it out and then just have an ear that you plug in there. Not a bad idea. And Khan says, I sent you some of my works. If you can check them, I'll be happy. I love your works. Well, thank you, Con. I appreciate that. I'll definitely check them out. But yes, I like the ear idea. If I were to have this on Shapeways, though, on a store, I would want it to be something where you could just buy it and order it, and it showed up at your door, and it was like finished and ready to go. So depending on how much material or how nice that would look, could maybe play around with that. Definitely avoid the butt cylinder like this. I made this pretty big though. We could definitely decrease the size of this to like a quarter of that, if not even more, to make that quite a bit less obvious. We could also even maybe do something on the bottom of our little mail canister there. We could be creative with it. But there are a few different ways there. Resolution is garbage. We're definitely not going to use that one. I'm going to be working with this guy a little bit more. And hopefully you guys learned something today. Hopefully that was informative for you. And I hope to see you guys in the next stream. Thanks everybody for coming and hanging out. And hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Alright, with that, definitely check out the first link down in the description. It's my Art War 2 entry, and let me pull that up real quick. Sorry, being very bad at copying a link here. My Art War 2 entry here, which is finally finished, if you guys haven't checked it out yet. The final image here of Akala and Bork, who is the character that we were just playing around with, getting 3D print ready. And then the detail sheet, which they require, and a little bit of additional information. And then you can kind of see some of the pre-process work that I went through to get to our final image that we just showed off there. But yes, a lot of work, a lot of time spent on this thing, and I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. It could be better, can always be better, but with the time that we have left, I think this is a good stopping point for this. And also our stream. But yes, definitely do check that out. There's also some other links to my materials, brushes, all that stuff down in the description if you're interested in that. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great day and a great week with it being Monday. So let's get out and get some stuff done. And in the next stream, we'll have to work on something new. I don't know what that is yet. I have a bunch of ideas. I have a ton of lists of stuff, and maybe some 2D artists that I want to work with, some other stuff. We'll talk more about that in the future, though, so you guys have a great day, and I will see you in the next stream or the next video. All right, see you guys.